I like to say before there was a love affair with automobiles, there was a love affair with trolleys.
Virtually everyone rode the streetcars, I would say, in their heyday.
In the teens and 20s, you were developing this flexibility to go anywhere, anytime. You didn't have to look at a schedule and plan your life around the streetcar. The streetcar was simply there.
Electric rail was once the fastest and easiest way to travel. Overhead wire and steel tracks reached far out into the countryside, connecting farm towns and creating a maze of lines in the nation's growing cities. It was transit for the masses, cheap, fast, and well used.
You had streetcars and you had interurbans and electric trains, and everywhere people would travel, they went by rail.
And almost all of it was privately owned, largely by real estate developers and electrical companies. Investment started early in Portland with one of the nation's first and largest systems. The lines formed the city's grid pattern streets, creating thoroughfares and neighborhoods that still exist today. Portland was a streetcar city. The rattle of the cars and the ring of the bell were familiar sounds for decades, and then they went silent. The streetcars disappeared, replaced by automobiles. For nearly half a century, streetcars were abandoned. But today, a streetcar revival is underway, and once again, Oregon is leading the nation.
If you want streetcars that are built in the United States, you have to come to us.
What's old is new again.
Funding for Oregon Experience is provided by the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, the Oregon Cultural Trust. Additional support provided by Robert C. and Nanny S. Warren Foundation, and viewers like you.
Here's a picture of 3 crewmen standing in front of car 415 on North Killingsworth Street. Here's a picture of the old Selwood Car Barns Clubhouse taken in 1910, and that facility still exists today. When I was a little kid, my grandmother didn't drive, and she took me on the streetcars in Milwaukee, Oregon, and that was the last line in the state.
Streetcars once rattled across cities all over the nation. They came in different colors, sizes, and equipment. But they had one thing in common. They traveled on tracks.
A streetcar is a public mass transit vehicle that goes along steel rails, and it gets its power in a number of different ways.
For decades, people rode them to work, took them to the store and to run errands. They went on weekend joyrides. And children hopped on and off and on again. For a few cents, the streetcars would take you just about anywhere you wanted to go. As the rail lines grew, the cities grew, creating a nation of streetcar cities. But technology changed, and streetcars were abandoned by all but the most dedicated rail fans.
But it's something I can't explain why a person likes something. It's just born in you. Well, I'm one of the 3 founders of the Oregon Electric Railway Historical Society. I have 3 sons, and Greg, of course, has followed my footsteps.
I was 5 years old. I couldn't see over the top of the window. I couldn't reach the controls either. But my dad stood next to me and he helped me. He set me on the stool here and he ran the brakes when I ran the control. It was a growing up experience that you can't get anywhere else. I was kind of lucky.
In Oregon, streetcars began with horses and the enterprising Ben Holliday. He was known as the Stagecoach King for the thousands of miles of stage line he operated across the country. He invested heavily in all types of transportation, and he saw opportunity in the growing city of Portland. It needed what Ben Holliday offered, a way to get out of the mud.
If you lived in Portland in, say, the 1870s, you got around mostly by walking.
In the early days, most people didn't have horses, didn't have buggies, and that meant that they didn't want to walk more than a mile or 2, especially in the muddy streets. So along comes Ben Holliday and the idea of the horse car line.
The city granted Holliday's company, the Portland Street Railway, a franchise to run 4 horse cars on steel tracks near the waterfront.
The first one was on actually First Avenue, and it ran very, very slowly, but you didn't have to walk that distance, so that's why it came in and it was able to make some money.
Within a few years, the bustling city quickly outgrew the single line along the old business district, and competitors jumped in to offer their services until horse car lines crisscrossed the city.
Some had very broad ambitions. It's hard to say what the Transcontinental Street Railway Company thought it was up to. They certainly weren't going to build a horse car line across the continent, but it showed they had expansive plans.
Horses were expensive to take care of, and the street smelled of manure. Operators and riders alike wanted better options. Some neighborhoods used steam dummies, smaller versions of trains designed to look like streetcars. And for a while, there was a nationwide bicycle craze.
The craze was sufficient enough that it came to the point of planning for a whole cycle-driven society.
In San Francisco, cable cars were proving successful, and other cities were eager to try them, including Portland.
A cable car is a streetcar that is carried along by an endless loop of cable. The cable car sits on top of that, grabs a hold of the moving cable, and is dragged along the street.
And Portland had such a system, and the cars were made by the same folks that made them in San Francisco. Our line was actually steeper than theirs. Our line was the second steepest in the United States.
A wooden trestle was built to carry cable cars up Portland's West Hills. On a wintry day in 1890, the system was unveiled to an eager public. But the crew had received just a few days' training.
The grip man on the first day failed to grab the cable correctly. The cable serves both as a brake and as propulsion, so when you're going downhill, you want to be tight on the cable too. Without grabbing it, you're just going to start going faster and faster.
That's just what it did, flying down the trestle to the city below. The inexperienced crew panicked and jumped to safety, leaving the passengers on board.
And eventually the car just stopped, but the people on the car didn't, and they all got thrown off, and I guess, some people were injured. So that's the story of the runaway cable car.
Over the years, Portland's only cable cars proved safe and effective, but expensive to build. Eventually, the system was abandoned. Instead, the future was in electricity. Researcher Frank Sprague figured out how to power a motor through an overhead wire. Thomas Edison soon bought him out and began manufacturing the trolley system.
The trolley gets its power from the overhead wire. We're running 600 volts DC. That's like having 50 car batteries putting all the power into that wire. The reason they call it a trolley is from the pole. The pole is trolling on the wire, pulling the power in to operate the car. So it got the name trolley. Okay, this is our controller. We use this to control the speed or the amount of voltage to the motors. The more voltage we give it, the faster we go.
Fluid is what they called electricity, this fluid that energized the car, and all that the motorman had to do was just twist a little handle, and this car was able to move faster, it was heavier than anything the horses could pull. And so it was seen as just cutting-edge technology. It was amazing.
The first successful electric rail system was running in Richmond, Virginia by 1888. Portland's first trolley cars were equipped with two 15-horsepower motors that would ultimately replace real horses.
The very first horse car also became the very last horse car, because when that line finally went bankrupt, nobody was interested in it anymore. Everybody that had a horse car line had converted it to electricity.
And a local company quickly set up shop to provide the needed electricity. On a summer evening in 1889, a switch was thrown in the newly built powerhouse at Willamette Falls. 14 miles away, street lamps in downtown Portland glowed to life. It was the first long-distance transmission of electricity in the United States. The company would later become Portland General Electric. By November of that year, the first electric rail line was inaugurated in Portland. It was only the third in the country. Within months, electric streetcar wires formed a web across the city.
Once you put the overhead in, it was really a great system. So it just showed up all over the country in a very short period of time.
Astoria has a great history with trolleys. There were trolleys that run all over Astoria. In fact, some of the old trolley tracks are still in place on our streets.
In the late 19th century, Astoria was booming, with over a dozen salmon canneries, 3 sawmills, and 2 breweries, and employees commuted to work on Edison's trolleys. By 1910, a new electric company, Pacific Power and Light, was running the system. At its height, service was every 10 minutes, with stops all over town, until 1922. Fire swept through the business district, burning out of control for 10 hours and leveling 30 city blocks, wiping out power distribution and just about everything else. The town eventually recovered, but the trolley lines did not. It took over 75 years for streetcars to return through a volunteer-run heritage line.
Okay, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
The car is called Old 300, and it was originally built in 1913. Today, the overhead trolley is gone, replaced by a diesel generator.
There we go again. Good job.
We have a lot of people that are riding it from noon to 7 o'clock in the evening. The trolley is packed full a good share of the time.
Welcome to Vinny's Trolley.
A handful of heritage lines exist all over the country. The Portland vintage trolleys are replicas of cars that ran along these same streets more than a century ago.
We'll be going over the steel bridge. It's the last bridge of its type in the country, in the world actually, that's operational.
We noticed that in the early days when we put the vintage trolley on downtown. And we noticed that these nice, modernistic European cars would come along, all painted up, the modern streetcar, and people would just stand aside and wave them on, and they'd wait for the streetcar to come, the old vintage trolley streetcar. It's something about the nostalgia, it's something about the look and feel, the wicker seats, the clickety-clack sound. It just, people want it, they prefer it.
I don't know what it is, you just get so you love them. I rode the old Consul Crest cars for 20 years. Consul Crests were very special, made by the Brill Corporation. There were the 10, and 501 through 510. 510 was a very noisy trolley. When it went through the neighborhoods up there, everybody woke up. They ran late at night, and it was really a troubling trolley.
The Council Crest line looped 2.5 miles from downtown to the city's highest point. The ride featured spectacular views, making it the star of the Portland streetcar system. Council Crest was the most famous line in the city, but there were plenty of others. Dozens of companies operated over nearly 200 miles of tracks, each with their own cars. Many were also generating and selling electricity, and deeply involved in real estate.
This was seen actually as a way of getting rich quick. I mean, a lot of people thought they were going to make a lot of money.
Most of the streetcar systems were actually run by developers. They'd get a tract of land. There was no way to get the people to the land, so they built a streetcar line. And a lot of our additions in Portland, Ladd's Addition, Selwood, Eastmoreland, all that was built around streetcar lines because that's how you get the people out there.
Along the rail lines, streetcar neighborhoods developed, with dense areas of homes and shops, all within walking distance of the trolley.
And this is in an era when there's no city planning, there's no zoning, it's pretty much a free-for-all.
And there were probably 20, 25 of those little neighborhoods, and they sort of grew together to become the city we have today.
The line shaped much more than just the city. They pushed out to nearby towns. In February of 1893, 16 miles of track and electrical wire connected Portland and Oregon City, creating what most people consider the nation's first interurban electric railway. It would run for another 65 years. Eventually, interurbans reached out in all directions, carrying passengers and freight faster and cheaper than steam trains, in a way that had never been possible before.
To have people actually going from Sherwood to Portland on a Sunday morning, for example, to go to church, was not something that people in Sherwood could do before.
They had one called the Supreme Court Special that took lawyers down to Salem. They also ran to the duck and beaver games, and students also used them to come and go from school.
In peak years, cars made hundreds of stops each day. Red Electrics went to Corvallis, while the competing Oregon Electrics went to Eugene. Even stopping at towns along the way, the trip took just 3 hours.
You get something to eat, there were lavatories on those cars, there were radios, and you got the newspaper and you sat down in your stuffed chair, and it must have been pretty fabulous.
But not all the service was first class. Some were so cold they were known as pneumonia cars, but people rode them just the same, sometimes just for the fun of it.
It was an event, it was an outing, and everybody dressed in their Sunday finest. Usually these were good weather events, so they had straw boaters on, and the ladies had very fancy blouses and dresses. They really do look like they're having a gay old time, as they used to say.
I'd ride to Kalamazoo on a trolley by golly with you.
To increase ridership on weekends and off hours, trolley companies built their own amusement parks. Jansen Beach, Oaks Park, and the roller coaster high atop Council Crest became favorite destinations. And in 1905, 150 cars an hour transported visitors to the Lewis and Clark Exposition. Streetcars lined city streets, shuttling 1.5 million people quickly and efficiently. The fair was a success, and the nation viewed Portland as a modern, innovative city.
At that point, they were still imagining that the streetcar was going to be the dominant mode, so they were expanding a lot.
There were plans to build lines all the way to San Francisco, but the money never materialized. The streetcars were almost exclusively dependent on private investment.
It was public transportation run by the private sector.
Just to show how privately oriented it was originally, the first bridge, the Morrison Street Bridge, was a privately owned bridge, and you paid a toll to cross over it. And some of the same investors in that bridge were the investors in the streetcar.
The companies were required to maintain all of their investments, including clearing city streets during bad weather. For many of Portland's streetcar companies, it all became too expensive, and they were forced to consolidate.
In 1906, finally, all of these private companies were assembled into a single company that was called the Portland Railway Light and Power Company, which is the predecessor of PGE today. It operated the street lighting system of the city, the electrical system, as well as all the streetcars.
Eventually, Oregon would have the third largest system of its kind in the country, with hundreds of miles of electric rail lines. But it was all about to disappear.
Reasons for the decline in streetcar usage, the big reason that sits right there in front of us is the automobile.
Here's a sleek new concept of low-cost motoring.
The automobile can do many of the things that the streetcar could do that we liked, and it could do some of them way better.
Gus, gasoline gus, and it hit me buzz.
In the late 1800s, the first automobiles were already rolling along city streets, but they weren't serious competition to trolleys. In Oregon, that began to change in 1919, when the state passed the nation's first gas tax to pay for improved roads. Soon, a network of paved streets and highways connected the state, making small towns and countryside more easily accessible. And the automobile became the new must-have technology, offering a sense of freedom most people had never experienced before.
It was there instantly. It was private. You didn't have to sit next to somebody else. You were by yourself. Many people found that desirable quality. And eventually, of course, it became relatively inexpensive.
The number of cars grew and grew until streets were clogged with them.
Once you have a lot of cars on the street, the streetcar operation becomes more difficult. Once all that other traffic is in there, then it has to slow down. The streetcar is stuck in the middle. If you're on the curb waiting for the streetcar, you have to walk across traffic, so that's unsafe.
The streetcars were out of place in the new era, and no one was willing to update the system that had been in place for so long.
In 1932, though, Portland ordered its last brand new streetcars. If you consider that they continued operating until 1950, people were riding cars that had been built in the 1910s.
The people who had to ride the old cars, they would prefer, of course, something a lot more comfortable, more modern. And of course, in those days, anything old you want to get rid of, and you want something modern.
Something modern was a bus on rubber wheels. And at first, they also ran on electricity through an overhead wire.
Oh, I liked riding them because on a trolley bus, you could stop at the base of a hill, and you start up that hill, and you'd outrun all the cars. I mean, they were fast.
But the trolley was facing a slow decline. Streetcar companies were making more money selling electricity than running cars. Over the years, fewer and fewer operated on city streets. By 1958, most lines were long gone.
Portland had this remnant line to Oregon City that lasted into the 1950s and in fact was even making money. But the rebuilding of the on-ramps to the Hawthorne Bridge caused the line to be cut.
And there were suddenly no more trolleys. And those were the ones that I rode as a kid.
Cars were burned for scrap metal. But enthusiasts saved some of the famous Council Crest cars. Over the years, rail fans were interested in preserving history, while other people were thinking about the future of transportation. In 2001, Portland became the first city in the nation to reintroduce a modern streetcar line in some of the same areas as the original streetcars. Portland already had a commuter-like rail system, but streetcars would serve a different purpose, stopping every few blocks in traffic to encourage mixed use of the downtown area.
The big goal here was to promote development in the central city. The investment happened and the development followed really quickly. And so a lot of other places in the country, looking for that kind of revival of their central cities, have come to look to see what we've done and how we've done it.
They're actually building streetcars in Portland again. And we're running streetcars. They run on the city streets, they mix in with automobiles. So suddenly, a person like myself that's concerned about preserving history, and now suddenly I'm looking at, well, it's not historic anymore because you've got all these streetcars. What's old is new again in Portland. The streetcar's been reinvented, and they seem to all successfully mix together heritage and museum and light rail and streetcar.
There's more about Streetcar City on Oregon Experience online. To learn more or to order a DVD of the show, please visit opb.org. Funding for Oregon Experience is provided by the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, the Oregon Cultural Trust. Additional support provided by Robert C. and Nanny S. Warren Foundation, and viewers like you.